Hi guys, tonight we're going to slowly explore what really happened when Columbus landed in 1492. As the world outside grows quiet and the lights dim, let your mind drift back to a time when the edges of the map were still blurred and the horizon felt like a mystery waiting to be solved. We are going to take a long, rhythmic journey through the damp cobblestone streets of old Europe, into the hushed halls of royal palaces, and eventually out onto the steady, rhythmic swells of the Atlantic Ocean. There is no rush tonight. We are simply following the wind and the stars, letting the history of the late 15th century wash over us like a slow-moving tide. Take a deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Imagine the cool, salt-tinged air of the Mediterranean. We are going back over 500 years, to a world that moved at the speed of a walking horse or a wooden ship catching a breeze. The walled world of the late 1400s. In the late 1400s, Europe was a place of heavy stone, flickering candlelight, and deep, ancient forests. Life moved slowly. The rhythms of the day were dictated by the rising sun and the tolling of church bells. To the people of that time, the world felt both very small and terrifyingly large. They knew their own villages, the nearby markets, and perhaps the grand cathedrals of the cities, but beyond the familiar coastlines lay a great sea of darkness. Imagine the scent of wood smoke hanging over a medieval town at dusk. The streets are narrow, paved with uneven stones that have been worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. In the libraries of monasteries, monks worked by the soft glow of beeswax candles, their quills scratching across parchment. They were copying maps, Mappa Mundi, that showed Jerusalem at the center of the world, with Europe, Africa, and Asia clustered around it like petals on a flower. Outside that flower was nothing but the vast, unknown ocean, often illustrated with whimsical sea monsters or swirling mists. During this time, Europe was hungry. Not just for food, but for the exotic. For centuries, the Silk Road had brought treasures from the east, silks that felt like water against the skin, and spices like cinnamon, cloves, and black pepper that turned a dull meal into a feast. But by the late 1400s, the old land routes were becoming difficult and expensive. The fall of Constantinople had closed many doors. The air in the counting houses of Venice and Genoa was thick with worry. How could they reach the riches of the Indies without crossing dangerous lands? The answer, many whispered, lay in the water. The dreamer from Genoa. In the midst of this shifting world lived a man named Cristoforo Colombo, known to us as Christopher Columbus. Think of him not as a figure in a textbook, but as a quiet, determined man standing on a dock, watching the masts of ships disappear over the curve of the earth. He was a tall man, often described as having a fair complexion that burned easily in the sun, and hair that turned white prematurely from the stresses of his internal visions. Columbus was a self-taught dreamer. He spent hours in dusty shops in Lisbon and Genoa, leaning over yellowed charts. He studied the works of Ptolemy and the travels of Marco Polo until the words blurred into the shadows of the evening. He wasn't looking for a new world, he didn't know such a thing existed. He was looking for a shortcut. He believed, with a stubborn, quiet intensity, that the world was smaller than the experts said. He believed that if he sailed west, into the setting sun, he would eventually bump into the golden roofs of Japan and the spice markets of China. Imagine Columbus sitting in a small room, the only sound being the rhythmic ticking of a clock or the distant crash of waves. He is measuring. He is calculating. He is looking at the ocean sea and seeing not a barrier, but a bridge. To him, the wind didn't just blow, it whispered directions. The stars weren't just lights, they were a silver map pinned to the velvet sky. He was a man possessed by a single, steady thought that hummed in his mind like a low, resonant note on a cello. The long walk to the throne. For years, Columbus carried his maps like a sacred burden. He was a man waiting for a yes in a world of no. He traveled from court to court, his boots dusty, his cloak worn at the edges. He went to Portugal, where the king's experts laughed softly behind their hands, telling him his geography was flawed. He went to England and France, knocking on doors that remained closed. But eventually, his path led him to Spain, a land of orange groves, dusty plains, and the towering mountains of the Sierra Nevada. At this time, Spain was a place of great change. King Ferdinand of Aragon and Queen Isabella of Castile were busy uniting their kingdoms, their minds filled with the sounds of trumpets and the clatter of armor. Imagine the grand, echoing halls of the Alcazar in Córdoba. The floors are cool marble, and the air is scented with incense and jasmine from the courtyard gardens. Columbus stood there, a humble sea captain among silken courtiers, waiting for an audience. Queen Isabella was a woman of deep faith and sharp intellect. When she looked at Columbus, she didn't just see a sailor, she saw a man whose eyes were fixed on a horizon no one else could see. The negotiations were not quick. They lasted years, long, slow years of waiting in the shadows of the court. Columbus followed the royal procession as it moved from city to city. He stayed in monasteries, like La Rabida, where the monks listened to his theories with kind curiosity. The anchors have left the seabed of Palos, and the three sisters, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, are now breathing with the rhythm of the open water. It is the morning of August 3, 1492, and the air is cool, carrying the scent of damp salt and the faint, lingering perfume of the Spanish pines. As the coastline of Spain dissolves into a thin, violet line on the horizon, a profound silence settles over the ships. It is not a silence of emptiness, but a silence of transition, the kind of quiet that comes when the familiar world ends and the vast, unwritten story of the sea begins. Close your eyes and imagine the sound of the wooden hull. It is a living sound. As the ships lean into the gentle morning breeze, the heavy timbers of the Santa Maria begin to talk. There is a low, rhythmic creaking, a deep wooden groan that sounds like the ship settling into a long, comfortable sleep. The masts, tall and straight against the pale blue sky, sway with a slow, hypnotic grace. The ropes, the thick hemp rigging that holds the sails, tighten and slacken with a soft, singing tension. Creak, stretch, sigh. It is the heartbeat of the voyage, a steady, repetitive pulse that will not stop for months. The rhythm of the morning watch. Life on board settles into a pattern as old as the sea itself. There is no hurry here. The ocean does not reward haste, it rewards patience. The crew, nearly 90 men in total, begin to find their place within the small, floating wooden world. The initial anxiety of departure, the tearful goodbyes at the dock, the final glances at the church spire of San Jorge, begins to soften into the steady work of the morning. Imagine the sailors moving across the deck in their bare feet. The wood is cool and slightly rough underfoot, damp with the morning mist. There is a quiet efficiency to their movements. One man coils a rope, laying it down in a perfect, spiraling circle like a sleeping snake. Another polishes the brass of a compass housing, the cloth moving in slow, circular motions until the metal reflects the soft morning light. The air is filled with the sound of the bow cutting through the water. It is a continuous, rushing hush, a white noise that drowns out the worries of the land. The water at the front of the ship curls away in a gentle, frothing wave, turning from deep indigo to a bright, translucent turquoise before settling back into the wake. It is a sound that invites you to let go of your thoughts, to simply exist in the space between the sky and the foam. The gentle Atlantic cradle. As the ships move further into the Atlantic, the land breeze fades and the great oceanic swell takes over. This is not the choppy, nervous water of the Mediterranean, this is the long, slow breath of the Atlantic. The ships rise with a slow, majestic lift, hold for a moment at the crest of a swell, and then slide down into the trough with a soft, cushioned weightlessness. Rise, hold, and fall. It is like being rocked in a giant, salt-scented cradle. The sailors find their sea legs, adjusting their weight instinctively to the tilt of the deck. They lean when the ship leans, they straighten when the ship levels. It becomes a dance, a slow-motion choreography that connects the human body to the movement of the planet. Columbus stands on the high aft deck of the Santa Maria. He is not the restless man of the court anymore. Here, surrounded by the blue infinity, he seems to find a quiet center. He watches the Pinta and the Nina bobbing nearby. They look like toys carved from walnut shells, brave and small against the immense backdrop of the sky. He watches the square sails, white and cream-colored, belly out as they catch the wind. They are full and smooth, like the chest of a bird in flight. The small rituals of survival. On board, time is measured not by hours, but by watches and the turning of the sandglass. Every half hour, a young cabin boy turns the ampollita, the glass timer filled with fine, gray sand. He calls out a short prayer or a rhythmic verse, his voice carrying softly over the wind. The sound of the sand trickling through the glass is the only clock they have, a quiet, granular reminder that they are moving steadily through the seconds of their lives. The meals are simple and slow. There are no fires on the wooden decks except for a small, sand-lined firebox called a fogan. Here, the cook prepares the daily ration. Imagine the smell of wood smoke mixing with the salty air as a pot of chickpeas and salted meat simmers slowly. The men gather in small groups, sitting on coils of rope or against the bulwarks. They break the hard ship's biscuit, the dry tack echoing with a crisp snap. They eat slowly, savoring the warmth, their eyes always drifting back to the horizon. There is a strange, peaceful intimacy in this small community. They share stories of their homes in Mogur and Huelva, stories of orange trees, the smell of baking bread, and the sound of bells in the evening. But as the days pass, those memories begin to feel like dreams. The reality is the wood, the rope, and the water. The ship is their entire universe, a tiny island of humanity drifting through a sapphire void. The golden afternoon. As the sun climbs to its zenith, the heat becomes a gentle weight. The shadows on the deck are sharp and dark, shifting slowly as the ship tacks. The crew finds shade under the overhang of the decks or beneath the curve of the sails. Some men mend their clothes with thick bone needles, their movements slow and rhythmic. Others simply watch the water. The sun rises on the 14th day, and the world is a mirror of the day before. The three ships are now deep within the belly of the Atlantic, further west than any European keel has ever cut. The air has changed, it is no longer the sharp, brisk air of the Spanish coast, but a heavy, warm, and humid breath that seems to wrap around the masts and the men like a damp silk sheet. There is a profound stillness here, despite the movement of the ships. It is the silence of a world that has never known the sound of a human voice, a cathedral of water where the only hymns are the whistle of the wind and the groan of the rigging. As the ships glide forward, the ocean beneath them seems to thicken in color. It is no longer the friendly turquoise of the shore, it has become a deep, bruised indigo, a blue so dark it almost looks black in the shadows of the swells. Looking over the side of the Santa Maria, a sailor might feel a sense of vertigo, realizing that the bottom of the sea has dropped away into an abyss miles deep. There are no mountains here to see, no valleys to walk, only the infinite, liquid dark. The meadow of the sea. It is during this middle stretch of the journey that the ships encounter something that stops the breath of even the most seasoned mariners. Imagine waking up to find that the blue water has vanished, replaced by a vast, undulating field of gold and green. This is the Sargasso Sea, a massive, swirling gyre where the currents collect millions of tons of floating seaweed. To the men on deck, it looks at first like land. From a distance, in the hazy morning light, the sailors point and whisper, their hearts leaping with the hope of a shoreline. But as they draw closer, they see it is an illusion. The seaweed, known as sargassum, stretches out for leagues in every direction, floating in thick, tangled mats. The sound of the ship changes. Instead of the clean hiss of water against the hull, there is a soft, muffled rustling. It is the sound of the wooden planks brushing against the vegetation. It is a gentle sound, like a broom sweeping a stone floor, but it carries a hidden weight. The sailors watch the weed wrap around the rudders and cling to the sides of the ships. A quiet, eerie tension begins to settle over the crew. In their minds, they have stories of ships becoming trapped in sea meadows, held fast by the plants until the food runs out and the sun bleaches the bones of the men. They fear that beneath these green mats lie hidden rocks or monsters waiting to pull them down. They stand at the railings, poking at the weed with long poles, watching the way it swirls and clumps. Columbus, however, remains a pillar of stillness. He stands on the quarterdeck, his hands resting lightly on the rail. He sees the seaweed not as a trap, but as a sign. He notices small crabs living in the tangles, and tiny, translucent fish darting between the leaves. He tells his men, in a voice as steady as the horizon, that this is proof they are nearing land. The earth is just beneath us, he says, his voice a low, comforting hum. The sea is simply offering us its garden. The mirror of the dark. As they move through the Sargasso, the wind sometimes drops to a whisper, and the ocean becomes a flat, polished mirror. This is the doldrums of the spirit. When the sails go slack, they hang from the yards like heavy, unwashed laundry. The rhythmic creaking of the ship slows to a heartbeat. In these moments of absolute calm, the silence is almost physical. You can hear a man's breathing from across the deck. You can hear the drip of water from a wet rope hitting the wood. The sun hangs directly overhead, a white-hot coin in a bleached sky, and the ships sit motionless on a sea of glass. The sailors begin to experience a new kind of weariness, not the exhaustion of hard labor, but the heavy fatigue of uncertainty. They sit in the shadows of the bulwarks, their eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for a ripple, a cloud, a bird, anything to break the monotony of the blue circle. They begin to count the days not by what happened, but by what didn't. Day 20, no land. Day 21, the wind is faint. Day 22, the ocean is still. Doubts begin to sprout in the quiet corners of the ships, like the mold on the damp hardtack. The men talk in low voices, their heads huddled together. They speak of the compass variation. A few days ago, the pilots noticed that the needle of the compass no longer pointed exactly to the North Star. The needle was drifting, leaning away from the celestial light they had trusted all their lives. To the sailors, it felt as though the very laws of nature were dissolving. If the stars and the magnets were lying, what was left to hold on to? The calm command. In the center of this swirling doubt stands Columbus. He is a master of the slow, outward calm. Even when his own heart must have hammered against his ribs at the sight of the shifting compass, he does not let his face betray him. He spends hours in his cabin, rewriting the ship's log. This is one of the great, quiet secrets of the voyage. To keep his men from panic, Columbus keeps two sets of records. In the true log, he marks the actual distance they have traveled, hundreds of leagues into the void. In the public log, which he shows to the crew, he marks shorter distances. He wants them to believe they are still within reach of Spain, still within the realm of the possible. Imagine him sitting at his small desk, the lantern swaying gently with the swell. The light flickers across his white hair and the weathered lines of his face. The ships are now ghosts of the sea, three pale shapes drifting through a world that seems to have forgotten the existence of land. We are deep into the second month of the voyage, a stretch of time where the days have lost their individual names and have merged into one long, continuous cycle of blue and gold. The Atlantic has become a landscape of repetition, the same swell, the same wind, the same salt-crusted wood. It is a time of profound stillness, but beneath that stillness, the hearts of the men have begun to beat with a different, more somber rhythm. The ocean is no longer a road, it has become an enclosure. To the sailors on the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, the world has shrunk to the width of a deck and the height of a mast. Everything beyond the wooden rail is an abstraction, a shimmering void that promises nothing but more of itself. The feeling of being lost in time is absolute. Without the landmarks of a church spire, a mountain peak, or a familiar headland, the mind begins to lose its grip on the concept of progress. They are moving, yes, but to the eye, they are standing perfectly still in the center of an infinite circle. The psychology of the infinite. Imagine the psychological weight of that horizon. Every morning, the sun climbs out of the water behind them, and every evening, it sinks into the water ahead of them. In between, there is nothing but the ocean sea. This repetition creates a strange, hypnotic trance. The sailors find themselves staring into the water for hours, watching the way the foam patterns dissolve and reform. They see shapes in the clouds, vast, spectral cities and jagged coastlines, only to watch them melt away as the wind shifts. In this state of isolation, the senses become preternaturally sharp. The men notice the slightest change in the ship's voice. They can hear a loose block rattling high in the rigging, or the way the hull groans a fraction deeper when the wind freshens. But this sharpness is tinged with a quiet melancholy. There is a sense that they are drifting away from their own lives. The memories of Spain, the taste of a fresh grape, the sound of a donkey's bray, the feel of dry dust between the toes, feel increasingly like stories told about someone else. The sailors no longer talk about the riches of the Indies with the same fervor. The gold of Cipango and the spices of Cathay have been replaced by a much simpler, deeper longing, the longing for a solid, unmoving floor. They crave the stillness of a room that does not sway. They crave the silence of a night that does not hiss with the sound of rushing water. Nighttime whispers and quiet doubts. When the sun goes down and the heavy purple shadows of the Atlantic night drape over the ships, the mood becomes even more introspective. This is the time of the dog watch, when the lamps are low and the officers are at the far end of the deck. Small groups of men gather in the lee of the lifeboats or near the galley, their voices hushed, barely rising above the creak of the timber. "How far do you think it is?" one sailor asks, his voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "The admiral says we are close," another responds, though the conviction in his voice is thin. "He says the birds we saw yesterday were land birds." "He has said that for a week," a third man whispers. "And the birds always fly on. Perhaps they are birds that live on the water. Perhaps there is no bottom to this sea. Perhaps the wind only blows west, and we are being pushed into the throat of the world where no one can ever return." This is the gentle tension that now defines the voyage. It is not a rebellion, not yet. It is a collective sigh of worry. It is the fear of the one-way wind. In the 15th century, the idea of the trade winds was not understood. To the sailors, the fact that the breeze had blown steadily from the east for weeks was terrifying. If the wind never changed direction, they would be unable to sail back to their wives, their children, and their homes. They felt like leaves caught in a stream, being carried further and further from the bank, with no way to swim back against the current. They speak of their families in the quiet, melodic tones of southern Spain. They remember the names of their daughters and the color of their kitchen walls. These conversations are a way of anchoring themselves to reality. By speaking the names of their loved ones, they remind themselves that they are still men of the earth, not just shadows on a wooden boat. The Admiral's Mask. High on the poop deck, Christopher Columbus remains a silhouette of absolute certainty. He knows that his life depends on the mask he wears. If he shows a moment of doubt, the thin thread of discipline holding the 90 men together will snap. Imagine him standing there, his legs braced against the slow roll of the ship. His eyes are tired, rimmed with the red salt sting of constant watching, but his back is straight. He has become a master of the long view. He does not look at the water immediately around the ship, he looks at the distant line where the sky meets the sea. To him, that line is not a barrier, but a promise. Inside, Columbus is a man of calculations and prayers. He continues his double bookkeeping, marking the false, shorter distances in the public log. He watches his men with the eye of a shepherd. He hears the whispers in the dark. He feels the pressure of their collective anxiety, a heavy weight that sits on his shoulders like a leaden cloak. But when he speaks, his voice is like the deep resonance of a bell. The calendar of the ships has now moved deep into the early days of October, and the world has undergone a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. The air, which for weeks had been a steady, salt-laden weight, is beginning to change. It is as if the ocean itself is beginning to breathe a different kind of life. There is no thunderous revelation, no sudden sighting of a mountain peak through the mist. Instead, there is a slow, quiet accumulation of details, a series of small, natural whispers that suggest the great sea of darkness might finally be reaching its limit. Imagine the Santa Maria as she sits in the middle of a warm, golden afternoon. The sun is no longer the harsh, bleaching eye of the mid-Atlantic. It has softened, casting a long, honey-colored light across the wooden planks of the deck. The crew, who had been huddled in a quiet, sullen lethargy, are starting to lift their heads. They are like animals sensing a change in the season before the first leaf turns. They are looking at the water with a new kind of intensity, a slow-burning focus that has replaced the hollow stare of the previous weeks. The language of the birds. The first sign is the sky. For a long time, the only birds seen were the lonely, wandering petrels or the occasional gannet, creatures of the high seas that could sleep on the waves and stay away from land for months. But now, the air is beginning to fill with a different kind of music. Small, colorful birds, no larger than a man's hand, have begun to appear in the rigging. They arrive in the soft light of dawn, their wings fluttering with a frantic, delicate energy that seems alien to the heavy, slow-moving world of the ships. These are not seabirds, they are songbirds, their feathers touched with flashes of green and yellow. They land on the crossbeams of the masts, chirping in a high, thin language that sounds like the gardens of Andalusia. The sailors watch them with a profound, breathless silence. They do not shout, they do not try to catch them. They simply stand at the base of the masts, their faces tilted upward, listening to the sound of land life. To a man who has heard nothing but the roar of the wind and the slap of the water for 30 days, the song of a small bird is a miracle. It is a fragile, living bridge between the wooden world they inhabit and the solid world they hope for. These birds are not just flying, they are migrating. Columbus, observing their flight paths with a quiet, analytical eye, notices that they are all heading toward the southwest. In a move of characteristic, steady wisdom, he decides to follow them. He orders the pilots to shift the course slightly, turning the prows of the ships to mirror the path of the birds. It is a moment of profound humility. The great admiral of the ocean sees setting his course by the instinct of a sparrow. The gifts of the tide. While the sky offers its omens, the surface of the water begins to present its own quiet evidence. The deep, featureless indigo of the abyss is being interrupted by the drift. One afternoon, a sailor on the Pinta, which is still leading the way, leans over the rail and sees something bobbing in the foam. He signals to the others, and they lower a small net. When they pull it up, they find a branch of a bush, its leaves still vibrant and green. It is not the brown, salt-dead seaweed of the Sargasso, this is a fresh cutting, a piece of a plant that was rooted in the soil only a few days ago. On the branch, there is a small, red berry, a tiny, perfect globe of sweetness that has never seen the inside of a European market. The branch is passed from hand to hand. The men touch the leaves, feeling the waxy texture and the suppleness of the wood. It smells of earth. It smells of rain. It smells of things that do not move with the tide. A few hours later, the Nina drifts past a piece of carved wood, a small, weathered plank that looks as though it has been shaped by a human tool. It is not part of a ship, it is something else, a fragment of a different life. The sailors look at it with a mixture of awe and a strange, quiet shiver. It is proof that they are not alone in the universe. Somewhere, beyond the curve of the water, there are hands that carve wood and fires that burn in the night. The ocean is no longer a desert. It is becoming a hallway, and at the end of the hallway, a door is standing slightly ajar. The warmer winds. The temperature of the world is rising in a slow, rhythmic way. The breezes that come from the west are no longer cool and sharp, they are becoming fragrant. In the late evening, when the sun has vanished and the first stars appear, the wind carries a scent that the sailors haven't smelled in what feels like a lifetime. It is the scent of the damp, the smell of sun-warmed mud, rotting leaves, and blooming flowers. Imagine standing on the deck at midnight. The ship is moving through a calm, silver sea. You close your eyes and breathe in. Instead of the sting of salt, you find a richness in the air, a complex perfume that speaks of forests and hidden rivers. It is a heavy, tropical sweetness that settles in the lungs and makes the heart beat with a slow, steady hope. The crew has stopped talking about turning back. The gentle tension has transformed into a state of vigilance. They are like people in a darkened theater, waiting for the curtain to rise. They move with more purpose now. They scrub the decks with a lighter touch, they check the sails with a more frequent eye. The silence on the ships is no longer the silence of despair, but the silence of anticipation. The clocks of the old world have stopped, and for a few suspended moments, time itself seems to hold its breath. It is 2 o'clock in the morning on October 12, 1492. The moon is high, a waning crescent that sheds a pale, milky glow over the Atlantic, turning the white caps of the waves into flickering silver spirits. The wind is steady, a firm, warm hand pushing the three ships forward at a clip of nearly 12 knots. On the Pinta, the swiftest of the sisters, the air is thick with the scent of the unseen. It is no longer the sharp, acidic sting of the open salt sea, it is something deeper, heavier, and sweeter. It is the smell of damp bark, of crushed flowers, and of soil that has been baking under a tropical sun. This fragrance, carried on the night breeze, acts like a physical weight, grounding the sailors who have felt untethered for 33 days. The vigil in the crow's nest. High above the deck of the Pinta, perched in the narrow, swaying basket of the crow's nest, stands Rodrigo de Triana. He is a man of the coast, a man whose eyes have spent a lifetime dissecting the subtle gradients of the horizon. In the absolute quiet of the middle watch, his world is reduced to the rhythmic snapping of the canvas below him and the long, mournful whistle of the wind through the hempen shrouds. Imagine the stillness of his position. The ship below him is a dark, wooden sliver cutting through a velvet sea. The stars above are so bright and so numerous that they seem to exert a pressure on the atmosphere. Rodrigo is not looking for gold, or for fame, or for the golden roofs of Japan. He is looking for a break in the pattern. For weeks, his eyes have been tricked by the ghosts of the Atlantic, the low-hanging clouds that mimic the jagged peaks of islands, the dark shadows of swells that look like distant cliffs. But tonight, the darkness is different. As the moon begins to descend toward the western horizon, it casts a long, low-angled light across the water. Rodrigo leans forward, his hands gripping the rough, salt-crusted wood of the railing. His breathing is slow and shallow. He sees a line. It is not the curved, organic line of a wave. It is a straight, dark horizontal stroke against the shimmering silver of the moonlit sea. He does not cry out immediately. The silence of the voyage is too heavy, too sacred to break with a false alarm. He blinks, letting his eyes rest, then looks again. The line is still there. It is solid. It is unmoving. As the Pinta surges forward on the crest of a great swell, the line grows. It begins to take on a texture, the jagged, uneven silhouette of trees. The realization does not come as a shock, it comes as a slow, warm tide rising in his chest. It is the feeling of a long, agonizing question finally meeting its answer. The world is not an infinite void. The sea of darkness has an edge. The signal of the small cannon. On the deck of the Pinta, the captain, Martín Alonso Pinzón, watches the lookout. He sees Rodrigo's silhouette stiffen. He sees the man lean so far over the edge of the basket that he seems to be flying. There is a quiet, orderly movement on the deck. The sailors, who have been sleeping in their cloaks, begin to stir. They don't speak, they simply stand and look west. They see it now, too. A white ribbon of sand, glowing like a ghost in the moonlight. The surf is breaking against a shore, a rhythmic, distant crush that sounds like the earth itself is breathing. Pinzón gives the order. It is not a shout, but a low, urgent command. The small cannon, the Lombard, at the prow is readied. A match is struck, a tiny orange spark in the night. Then, a sudden, heavy thud echoes across the water. It is not a sound of war, but a bell of announcement. A plume of white smoke drifts back over the deck, smelling of sulfur and triumph, before being swallowed by the sweet land breeze. Across the water, on the Santa Maria, Christopher Columbus hears the shot. He has been awake for hours, perhaps for days. He stands at the railing, his white hair caught in the moonlight, his hands trembling slightly as they clasp a rosary. He looks at the dark line on the horizon and feels the immense, crushing weight of 20 years of doubt, ridicule, and poverty simply evaporate. He is no longer a dreamer, he is a mapmaker. He is no longer a beggar at the feet of kings, he is the admiral of the ocean sea. The arrival of the gray light. The ships do not land immediately. The sea near an unknown shore is a dangerous place of hidden reefs and shallow banks. With a quiet, professional grace, the crews begin to shorten sail. The great square mainsails are furled, their heavy canvas folded away by tired, salt-worn hands. The ships slow down, turning to pace back and forth in the deep water, waiting for the sun. This period of waiting is the most dreamlike of all. The three ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, bob gently in the swell, their lanterns flickering like low stars. The men sit on the decks, wrapped in their cloaks, watching the land grow clearer as the sky transitions from black to a deep, bruised indigo. Imagine the sounds of this pre-dawn vigil. The water lapping against the hull is no longer the deep ocean slap, but a gentler, more musical cluck. From the shore, carried on the cooling morning air, comes the sound of a forest waking up. It is a riot of birdsong, high, liquid whistles, deep rhythmic honks, and the chatter of parrots. It is a wall of sound that feels vibrant and ancient, a symphony for a world that has no clocks and no cathedrals. The morning sun has now crested the horizon, casting a long, honey-colored light across the Bay of Guanahani. The water is so still and so clear that the three ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina, appear to be suspended in mid-air, their dark wooden hulls mirrored perfectly in the turquoise depths below. There is a profound, holy quiet that hangs over the island, a silence that has existed for thousands of years and is only now, in this slow and golden hour, beginning to ripple with the arrival of the visitors from the east. Christopher Columbus remains on his knees for a long time, his hands buried in the cool, white coral sand. The sensation of the earth, unmoving, solid, and fragrant, is almost overwhelming after the months of shifting blue. The scarlet of his cloak is a vibrant, rhythmic pulse of color against the pale beach. Around him, the sailors have begun to move with a slow, cautious reverence. They do not run, they do not cheer. They walk as if they are in a cathedral made of palm fronds and sunlight. The breath of the island. Take a deep breath and imagine the air of this new world. It is not like the air of Europe, which is often heavy with the scent of coal smoke, damp stone, and crowded streets. This air is light. It is washed clean by the vastness of the Atlantic and scented by 1,000 different flowers that have never known a winter. It smells of vanilla, of crushed green leaves, and of the sweet, ozonic mist that rises where the gentle surf meets the shore. The vegetation comes right down to the edge of the sand, a wall of living emerald. There are trees here with vast, buttressed roots that look like the pillars of an ancient temple. The leaves are broad and waxy, catching the sunlight and reflecting it in a million shimmering shards of green. High above, the coconut palms sway with a rhythmic, clicking sound, their fronds brushing against one another like the wings of giant birds. As you stand on this beach in your mind, let the sounds of the island wash over you. There is the low, consistent hush of the waves, a sound that is as steady as a heartbeat. There is the occasional, sharp cry of a parrot, a flash of scarlet or bright yellow feathers disappearing into the canopy. And then, there is the sound of the wind, a soft and melodic sighing that moves through the forest, carrying with it the secrets of a continent the sailors cannot yet imagine. The emergence of the Taino. As the sun rises higher, the forest begins to move. It is not the wind this time, but something more deliberate. From the deep shadows of the giant ferns and the mahogany trees, figures begin to emerge. These are the Taino, the people of the island, and they move with a grace that is as natural as the swaying of the palms. They do not come with weapons or with shouts of war. They come with a quiet, wide-eyed curiosity that mirrors the curiosity of the sailors. To the Taino, these three great wooden houses with their white wings have descended from the sky. They have watched from the shadows as the men in their heavy, colorful clothes stepped out of the small boats. Imagine the scene from their perspective, the morning light catching the steel of a helmet, the brilliant red of the admiral's cloak, and the strange, pale skin of the visitors. It is a moment of profound, mutual wonder. Two branches of the human family, separated by 10,000 miles and as many years, are looking at one another across a narrow strip of white sand. The Taino are beautiful in the morning light. Their skin is the color of polished copper, and their hair is as black and glossy as a raven's wing. They wear no heavy wool or restrictive armor, they move freely, their bodies decorated with small ornaments of gold and bright feathers. Their eyes are dark and clear, filled with a peaceful intelligence. The first encounter. The first encounter happens with the slow, deliberate pace of a dream. Columbus stands up, brushing the white sand from his knees. He holds the royal standard of Spain, the heavy silk fluttering gently in the breeze. He does not move toward the forest, he waits. He understands that in this moment, the most important thing is the stillness. A small group of Taino men and women step out onto the open beach. Their feet leave light, rhythmic prints in the sand. They stop a few yards away, their heads tilted, their hands open and empty to show they mean no harm. One of the elders, a man with deep lines of wisdom around his eyes, steps forward. He reaches out a hand, not to strike, but to touch the strange, rough fabric of the admiral's scarlet cloak. Columbus smiles. It is a slow, genuine smile of relief and wonder. He reaches into a pouch at his side and pulls out a string of glass beads, bright, translucent globes of red and blue that catch the tropical sun and turn it into fire. He holds them out in his open palm. The Taino elder takes the beads with a gentle, tentative touch. He holds them up to his eyes, watching the way the light dances inside the glass. He laughs softly, a sound like clear water running over stones. He turns to his people and shows them the gift, and the tension that had been hovering over the beach like a summer mist begins to dissipate. This is a moment of pure, unhurried connection. There are no words that both sides can understand, so they speak with their eyes, with their hands, and with the rhythm of their breathing. It is a conversation of gestures, a nod of the head, a pointing toward the sun, a hand pressed to the heart. The exchange of gifts. The Taino begin to bring their own gifts from the forest. The sun remains suspended in the warm, tropical sky of October 12, 1492, as the initial shock of the encounter begins to settle into a slow, rhythmic curiosity. On the white coral sands of Guanahani, the air is thick with the scent of salt water and unknown blossoms, and the silence that follows the first landing is filled with 1,000 small, natural sounds. It is a moment of profound observation, where every movement is deliberate and every glance is a discovery. Imagine the sailors, their skin pale and salt-cracked after weeks at sea, standing in their heavy wool and leather. Beside them, the Taino people move with a liquid ease, their bodies unburdened by the weight of European textile. There is no language to bridge the gap, no common tongue to explain the months of sailing or the centuries of island life. Instead, there is the language of the eyes, the hands, and the shared space of the beach. The language of objects. The first interactions are centered around the exchange of the physical. In a world without common words, an object becomes a messenger. Columbus, standing with a practiced, quiet dignity, reaches into a wooden chest brought from the Santa Maria. Inside are the trinkets of Europe, things that were common in the markets of Seville but are magical here in the light of the Caribbean sun. He pulls out a handful of glass beads. To the sailors, these are inexpensive bonds of colored glass, but as the sun hits them, they transform. They scatter the light into shards of crimson, cobalt, and emerald. One of the Taino men, his hair tied back with a cord of vegetable fiber, reaches out. His fingers are steady and gentle. As the beads drop into his palm, he feels their coolness, their smoothness, their weight. He holds them up to the sun, watching the light dance through the translucent spheres. To him, they are not just beads, they are captured fragments of the sky and the sea. In return, the Taino offer the gifts of their labor and their land. They bring balls of caguani, the soft, raw cotton that grows in the island's interior. It is snowy white and feels like a captured cloud in the rough hands of the sailors. They exchange parrots, vibrant, living creatures with feathers the color of a rainforest canopy. The birds shift from the shoulders of the Taino to the shoulders of the Spaniards, their claws gripping the rough wool of the tunics, their heads cocking as they mimic the strange, low vibrations of Spanish laughter. There is a slow, rhythmic quality to this trading. It is not a hurried marketplace, it is a ritual of recognition. Each object passed from hand to hand is a way of saying, "I see you. I recognize your reality." The jingle of a hawk's bell, a tiny silver-toned instrument meant for falconry in Europe, becomes a source of endless delight. The Taino tie them to their wrists and ankles, moving their limbs just to hear the high, crystalline chime that cuts through the hum of the surf. Observations of the body and spirit. As the afternoon progresses, the two groups begin to observe the finer details of one another's existence. The sailors, weary from the harsh discipline of the ship, look at the Taino with a sense of wonder. They note the physical health of these people, the straightness of their limbs, the clarity of their skin, and the strength in their movements. There is no sign of the diseases or the nutritional deficiencies that haunted the slums of 15th-century Europe. The Taino, in turn, look at the Spaniards with a quiet, analytical gaze. They touch the heavy fabric of the doublets, wondering at a people who would wrap themselves in thick layers of wool in such a warm and golden climate. They look at the metal of the swords and the breastplates, feeling the cold, hard surface of the steel. It is a material they do not possess, and its sharpness is a source of quiet awe. When Columbus shows them a sword, one man reaches out and grips the blade by the edge, cutting his finger. The sight of the red blood on the silver steel is a moment of shared humanity, a reminder that despite the differences in dress and technology, the life within is the same. Columbus notes in his journals, with the slow scratch of his quill, the appearance of the people. He describes them as very well built, with very handsome bodies and very good faces. He notices the paint they wear, black, white, and red earth pigments applied in geometric patterns to their faces and torsos. It is not a mask of war, but a language of identity and protection against the sun. He observes the Lucaos, or islands, and how the people seem to live in a state of communal harmony. There are no fences on the beach, no locked doors in the village. The concept of mine and thine seems to be fluid, like the tide. The architecture of the village. As the heat of the day softens, the interaction moves from the open sand into the dappled shade of the village. The path is narrow and worn smooth by bare feet. The sailors follow the Taino through the monte, the low forest that rings the coast. Here, the air is still and sweet, filled with the scent of damp earth and the high, vibrating hum of cicadas. The village is a masterpiece of natural engineering. The houses, or bohayos, are circular, built from the sturdy trunks of palms and thatched with the dried fronds. They are designed to breathe, allowing the cool sea breeze to pass through the walls while keeping out the sudden, heavy tropical rains. Inside, the sailors see the hamacas, the hammocks. Imagine the sailor's reaction to the hammock. The moon continues its slow, silver transit over the Bay of Guanahani, casting a tranquil light upon the 3 ships that now rest at anchor. On the deck of the Santa Maria, the world feels perfectly balanced. The air is warm, thick with the scent of the island's night-blooming flowers and the damp, loamy breath of the forest. Christopher Columbus sits in the quiet of his cabin, the flame of a single beeswax candle flickering in the gentle breeze that drifts through the open porthole. He is a man of intense focus, and tonight, his mind is weaving together the threads of everything he has seen. But as he dips his quill into the ink, he is writing a story that exists in his mind, a story that does not quite match the reality of the soil beneath his feet. This is the moment of the great misunderstanding, a quiet, peaceful era that will echo through the centuries. To Columbus, this is not a new world. To him, the maps of his youth are still correct, and he has simply found the back door to the ancient East. The map in the mind. Imagine the internal world of the admiral. He has spent years staring at the charts of Ptolemy and the descriptions of Marco Polo. In his mind, the globe is smaller, tighter, and more intimate than it truly is. He believes that by sailing west, he has bypassed the vastness of the Atlantic and arrived at the fringes of the Indies, that legendary collection of islands and kingdoms that lay off the coast of Asia. He looks at the Taino people he met today, and in his mind, he fits them into the categories he already knows. He calls them Indios, or Indians. It is a name born of a mistake, a name given to people who have no connection to the Indus River or the subcontinent of India. Yet, in the quiet of the night, as he writes by candlelight, the name feels right to him. It feels like a triumph of logic. He is not lost, he is exactly where he intended to be. This misunderstanding is not born of malice, but of a profound, quiet conviction. Columbus is a man who needs the world to be what he promised the king and queen it would be. He sees the gold ornaments in the ears of the Taino and remembers the golden Chersonese described by the ancients. He sees the lush greenery and remembers the earthly paradise mentioned in sacred texts. He is looking at a brand new painting, but he is describing it using the colors of an old one. The gentle weight of consequences. As the night deepens, the atmosphere on the ship remains peaceful, yet there is a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the gravity of the moment. We are at the very beginning of a long chain of events. Tonight, it is just 3 ships in a quiet bay, and a group of people sharing fruit and glass beads. But the Indies that Columbus has named will soon become a place where 2 vastly different worlds begin to collide. Think of it like a pebble dropped into the center of a perfectly still pond. The splash is small, hardly a sound at all. But the ripples have begun. They are moving outward, slow and rhythmic, destined to touch shores that are currently sleeping in ignorance. Columbus writes of the tractability of the people. He notes how they have no iron and no knowledge of European weapons. In his reflective, calm state, he sees this as a sign of their purity, their closeness to a state of grace. He imagines a future where they are brought into the fold of his world, where they learn his language and his faith. He does not yet see the shadows that will follow this light. He sees a garden waiting to be tended, not a civilization that is already complete. The geography of hope. Outside on the deck, the sailors are asleep, their dreams likely filled with the bright colors of the parrots and the sweetness of the tropical fruits. They, too, believe they are in the Indies. They talk of reaching the mainland, of finding the Great Khan and the marble bridges of Quinsay. They look at the stars and imagine they are the same ones that look down upon the spice markets of Malacca. This shared misunderstanding creates a strange, dreamlike atmosphere. The reality of the Caribbean, the unique ecology, the specific culture of the Taino, the vast distance that still separates them from Asia, is hidden behind a veil of expectation. They are standing on the threshold of a continent that has no name in their language, yet they speak of it as if it were an old friend. The ocean behind them, which they called the Sea of Darkness, is now a bridge. They have proven that the horizon can be crossed. But in doing so, they have unknowingly invited the rest of Europe to follow. The quietness of the bay tonight is the last moment of true isolation for this island. Soon, the maps will be redrawn. Soon, the silence of the forest will be joined by the sounds of different tools, different prayers, and different ambitions. The subtle changes in the air. As the dawn begins to approach, the air turns slightly cooler. The scent of the land grows even stronger, a mix of damp earth and wood smoke from the village. Columbus closes his journal. He feels a sense of profound peace, but also a lingering, quiet restlessness. He has found the Indies, but he has not yet found the gold of the Great Khan. He has found the people, but he has not yet found the source of their ornaments. He is already planning the next day's journey. He wants to sail further, to find the mainland. He is a man who cannot sit still in paradise. The very determination that brought him across the Atlantic now pushes him to look past the beauty of Guanahani toward a goal that doesn't exist where he thinks it does. The sun has now climbed high enough to turn the Bay of Guanahani into a sheet of liquid turquoise, a color so vibrant and pure it feels like a memory from a dream. As the first full day of this new world unfolds, a profound and heavy sense of peace descends over the Santa Maria, the Pinta, and the Nina. The frantic energy of the arrival, the shock of the sighting, and the initial rush of the landing have all begun to settle into a deep, meditative calm. Take a slow, deep breath, and imagine the ship sitting perfectly still. The anchors have found their home in the soft white sand of the seabed, and for the first time in many months, the wooden hulls are not fighting the current or the wind. They are resting. They are cradled. The journey that began in the dusty, cobblestone streets of Palos has reached its silent, golden destination. The reflection of the long way. As the morning progresses, the men on the decks find themselves sitting in quiet contemplation, looking back toward the east, where the vast Atlantic stretches out like a blue velvet curtain. They think of the sea of darkness they have just crossed, the weeks of nothing but the horizon, the terrifying silence of the doldrums, and the strange, golden meadows of the Sargasso Sea. That journey, which felt endless while they were within it, now feels like a bridge of stars. Every league they sailed was a step away from the familiar and a step toward the impossible. They reflect on the nights they spent huddled in their cloaks, watching the North Star and wondering if the world simply dropped away into a void. Now, as the warm, tropical sun soothes their salt-cracked skin, those fears feel as distant as a half-forgotten nightmare. They realize, in a slow and sleepy way, that the mystery of the unknown has been replaced by the beauty of the found. The ocean sea was not a barrier, it was a path. The darkness was not an ending, it was a beginning. There is a profound comfort in the realization that the world is larger, kinder, and more abundant than their maps had ever dared to suggest. The quiet pivot of history. As we sit here in the stillness of this Caribbean morning, it is worth reflecting on how a single moment of quiet can change the course of everything. There were no great explosions today, no grand monuments built, no vast cities conquered. There was only a man stepping onto a beach, a handful of glass beads exchanged for a ball of cotton, and the scent of unknown flowers drifting on the breeze. Yet, this small, rhythmic landing has shifted the axis of the human story. The two halves of the globe, which had been spinning in isolation for thousands of years, have finally touched. It is like two old friends finding one another after a lifetime apart, standing on the sand and trying to remember each other's names. History often speaks of this moment with the sound of trumpets and the clash of steel, but tonight, we remember it as a whisper. It was a change that happened in the heartbeat of a bird, in the rustle of a palm frond, and in the quiet scratch of a quill on parchment. The world grew twice as large in the space of a single dawn. The consequences of this meeting are vast, a tangle of futures and fates that will eventually touch every corner of the earth, but for right now, in the golden light of October 1492, those consequences are still sleeping. They are seeds beneath the soil, waiting for the rains of time. The mystery remains. Even though land has been found, the mystery has not vanished, it has simply changed shape. As Columbus looks out at the green horizon, he realizes that he has not reached the end of the journey, but the beginning of a much deeper exploration. Every island he sees in the distance is a new question. Every sound from the forest is a new mystery. The Atlantic is no longer a sea of darkness, but it remains a sea of wonder. The sailors look at the Taino and see a way of life that is so different from their own that it feels like looking into a mirror from another dimension. They see people who live without iron, without coins, and without the heavy stone walls of Europe. They see a world where the primary currency is generosity and the primary rhythm is the tide. This realization brings with it a quiet, philosophical weight. It forces the mind to slow down, to reconsider what is truly necessary for a good life. Is it the stone cathedrals of Spain, or is it the woven hammock under the palms? Is it the silk of the East, or the soft, raw cotton of Guanahani? The sailors don't have the answers, but as they sit in the sun, they feel the questions drifting past them like the white clouds above. The lullaby of the wooden ships. The sound of the ships has changed. The Santa Maria is no longer groaning under the strain of the gale. Now, she makes a soft, rhythmic cluck-cluck as the gentle swells of the bay tap against her side. The masts, which used to scream in the wind, now sing a low, melodic tune, a soft whistling as the breeze passes through the rigging. Imagine the feeling of lying on the deck now, with the ship at anchor. The movement is different. It is a slow, circular swaying, a gentle rotation that feels like being rocked in a warm, salty palm. The wood is warm beneath you, smelling of pine resin and old sun. The shadows of the ropes create a shifting, geometric pattern across your closed eyelids. Everything is at rest. The quest is over. The doubt is gone. The admiral is in his cabin, his mind finally still, his prayers finally answered.